The rain was pelting against the windows of my London flat when I made the call that would change everything. After 16 years of politely accepting excuses, after 6 years of being systematically excluded from my own grandchildren's birthday celebrations, after countless reassurances of next time, I finally picked up the phone and dialed the number for Blackstone Investigations. Mrs. Montgomery, the crisp British voice on the other end said, "How may we assist you? I need to know why my daughter-in-law has been lying to me for years about my grandchildren's birthday parties," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I suspect the truth is far worse than simple family drama." It had taken me 3 sleepless nights to work up the courage to make that call. 3 nights of staring at my phone, rereading the last text message from my son Christopher. "Sorry, Mom. Sophia's sweet 16 was just immediate family. You understand? Next time for sure. Next time. Always next time." For 16 years it had been next time. I am Beatrice Montgomery, 68 years old, retired federal judge, and apparently the most easily forgotten grandmother in the history of family celebrations. I've spent the last 10 years living in London after accepting a position with the International Court of Justice. It was a prestigious appointment, meant to be the crown jewel of my legal career. Instead, it became the perfect excuse for my daughter-in-law to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. The move to England had been necessary. Theodore, my husband of 45 years, had passed away 12 years ago, and the offer to serve on the International Tribunal arrived at a moment when I desperately needed purpose beyond grief. Christopher had been supportive. He assured me that distance wouldn't affect our family relationships, that modern technology would keep us connected, that the grandchildren would love having a grandmother with such an exciting international career. What Christopher hadn't mentioned was that his wife, Natasha, would see my relocation not as a challenge, but as an opportunity. The first few years after my move were manageable. I flew back to Connecticut for major holidays. The children visited me in London during summer breaks. We maintained regular video calls that made the distance feel temporary rather than permanent. Sophia and Alexander, my precious grandchildren, seemed delighted by their exotic grandmother, the one who lived in a flat overlooking Hyde Park and could take them to see the crown jewels. But gradually, insidiously, things changed. The visits became less frequent. The video calls were interrupted by school commitments and sports practices that always seemed to coincide with our scheduled conversations. Invitations to visit became conditional on increasingly complicated logistics that somehow never aligned with my availability. "The children have been so busy with activities," Natasha would say during our brief phone calls. "You know how it is with teenagers. They barely have time for family dinners, let alone international video calls." I did know how it was with teenagers. I had raised Christopher. I had navigated adolescence successfully, and I knew the difference between natural teenage independence and deliberate parental interference. What I hadn't understood, what I couldn't yet imagine, was the true scope of Natasha's manipulation. The birthday party exclusions were the most painful. Every year I asked about celebration plans. Every year I offered to fly back to Connecticut. Every year I suggested alternative dates. And every year, Natasha had a reason my presence would be complicated. "We're keeping it small this year," she would say. "Just a few close friends. You know how overwhelming big celebrations can be for children." Then I would see the social media posts the following day. Professional photographers. Elaborate decorations. 50 or 60 guests. Neighbors I'd never met. Family friends who had known the children for less time than I had been their grandmother. Natasha's Instagram account was a carefully curated chronicle of family joy that somehow never included any mention of a grandmother who lived overseas. When I confronted Christopher, his response never varied. "It's just a small thing, Mom. Next time we'll plan better." But next time never came. This year, when Sophia turned 16, I saw photographs of a celebration with 300 guests, professional catering, and what appeared to be a live band. That was when I finally understood. These were not oversights. They were not scheduling conflicts. They were deliberate exclusions, designed to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. The investigator I hired, James Whitmore, was a former Scotland Yard detective who specialized in family fraud cases. He had the methodical precision that appealed to my legal training and the discretion my international position required. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said during our initial meeting in his Mayfair office, "family exclusion cases often reveal patterns of behavior that go far beyond simple personality conflicts. What you're describing suggests systematic alienation, rather than casual rudeness." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means your daughter-in-law has likely constructed an elaborate framework of lies to justify your absence from family events. People don't maintain deception on this scale without creating supporting narratives. Stories that make the lies feel reasonable." "What kind of narratives?" "That depends on how creative and how ruthless she's willing to be." James began by examining social media accounts, public records, and communication patterns between England and Connecticut. What he uncovered in the first week was disturbing enough to warrant a face-to-face meeting in my London flat. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, settling into my sitting room with a folder of printed documentation, "I need to prepare you for some very difficult information." "How difficult?" "Your daughter-in-law has been telling people that you're dead." The word struck like physical blows. I sat in my comfortable London flat, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren who apparently believed their grandmother had passed away, trying to process something so cruel it bordered on the unbelievable. "That's impossible," I said. "I speak to Christopher regularly. He visited me just 8 months ago." "Your son visits you secretly," James replied. "According to my investigation, he tells his family he's traveling for medical conferences when he comes to London." "Secret visits." "Mrs. Montgomery, your daughter-in-law told your grandchildren that you passed away 6 years ago from heart complications. She organized a memorial service, accepted condolences from friends and neighbors, and has been maintaining this fiction for over half a decade." The room spun. Sophia and Alexander, now 16 and 14, had been living for 6 years believing their paternal grandmother was gone. They had mourned my death while I sent Christmas cards from London that apparently never reached them. "The birthday parties," I whispered. "The birthday parties," James confirmed, "have been occasions where your grandchildren's friends express sympathy about their deceased grandmother, while your daughter-in-law accepts condolences and praise for helping the children cope with their loss." "And Christopher allows this?" "Your son appears to be caught between maintaining his mother's actual existence and avoiding confrontation with his wife about her elaborate deception. He had chosen the path of least resistance, one that required keeping both relationships separate and secret." I rose from my chair and walked to the window overlooking Hyde Park, where I had spent countless afternoons thinking about my grandchildren, imagining futures and planning visits that never came. Behind me, James continued outlining the breadth of Natasha's deception, but his voice faded into indistinct noise as the reality of what had been done to my family settled in. My grandchildren thought I was dead. They had mourned me, grieved me, lived their young lives believing their grandmother was gone, while I was very much alive, missing them, loving them, and being systematically erased from their world. But I was not dead. I was a retired federal judge with substantial financial resources, international legal connections, and 40 years of experience dealing with people who believed they could manipulate the legal system for personal gain. "James," I said, turning back toward him, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "I want you to find out exactly when Sophia's next birthday celebration is scheduled." He hesitated. "What are you planning, Mrs. Montgomery?" "I'm planning to attend my granddaughter's party," I replied. "And I'm planning to resurrect myself in front of 300 people who believe they're celebrating the birthday of a girl whose grandmother died 6 years ago. Some lies are so elaborate they can only be exposed through dramatic revelation. This would be one of those revelations." The flight from London to New York felt like the longest 8 hours of my life, even in first class. I spent most of the journey staring out the window, suspended between fury and heartbreak, as I absorbed everything James Whitmore's investigation had uncovered about my family's 6-year deception. James had provided me with a comprehensive dossier, something that read less like a report and more like a legal thriller. Natasha hadn't merely told a few people that I had died. She had orchestrated a full-scale fraud. There were forged death certificates, fabricated funeral arrangements, a meticulously maintained social media presence documenting my grandchildren's grief journey after their grandmother's supposed passing. A memorial service had been held at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Greenwich, Connecticut. Over 200 people attended. James had obtained photographs from the church's community newsletter, images that made my stomach turn. In them, my son Christopher stood at the pulpit, delivering a eulogy about his beloved mother's peaceful passing in London. In the front pew sat Sophia and Alexander, their young faces heavy with grief, mourning a grandmother they believed was gone forever. Natasha had even commissioned a memorial garden stone for their backyard, engraved with my name and the dates 1955 to 2018. According to James's report, my grandchildren had spent years placing flowers at that stone, believing they were honoring my memory. But the cruelest detail, the one that left me physically shaking, was the college fund. Natasha had established memorial scholarship funds in my name at both Yale and Harvard, soliciting donations from friends and colleagues eager to honor my legacy in legal education. She had raised more than $30,000 through these fraudulent memorials, money supposedly earmarked for Sophia and Alexander's education, but in reality used to finance Natasha's lifestyle. As the plane descended into JFK, I reviewed the timeline James had constructed. The announcement of my death had come 6 years earlier, just 2 months after a particularly difficult phone call in which I had confronted Natasha about being excluded from Alexander's 10th birthday celebration. Mrs. Montgomery became ill very suddenly while visiting a friend in the countryside. Natasha had told people. It was peaceful, she said. Exactly what she would have wanted. The countryside friend did not exist. The illness was a fabrication. The only truth was this. Natasha wanted me gone from her family's life, and distance had made it easier to accomplish that goal through lies rather than confrontation. I took a taxi from the airport to the Marriott in Stamford, Connecticut, checking in under my maiden name to ensure my presence remained undiscovered until the proper moment. Sophia's celebration was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Greenwich Country Club. Cocktails at 7. Dinner at 8. 300 guests. The invitation James had obtained described the theme as Sweet 16 Masquerade, with elegant masks provided at the venue. Perfect cover for a dead grandmother's resurrection. Friday morning I called Christopher's office. I spoke to his secretary, identifying myself as Mrs. B. Harrison and requesting an urgent consultation regarding a family medical matter. Christopher, unaware that his supposedly deceased mother was calling from a hotel less than 20 minutes away, agreed to see me at 10. I arrived wearing dark sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, partially obscuring my face. Sitting in the waiting room among patients seeking cosmetic surgical consultations, I felt absurdly like a character in a spy novel. Mrs. Harrison, the secretary called. I stood and followed her into my son's office. Christopher was seated behind his desk, reviewing patient charts. I closed the door behind me. Dr. Montgomery, I began, my tone formal and composed. I have a rather unusual situation to discuss. He looked up. I watched his face move through confusion, recognition, and finally absolute terror as the truth registered. Mom, he whispered. Hello, Christopher, I said calmly. I understand congratulations are in order for Sophia's Sweet 16 celebration tomorrow evening. How are you? His voice shook. What are you doing here? I'm here because I hired a private investigator to find out why I've been excluded from my grandchildren's birthday. For 6 years. What I discovered was considerably more disturbing than simple family rudeness. His hands began to tremble. If I was in Connecticut, if I knew about Sophia's party, then I knew everything. Mom, I can explain. Can you? I asked. Can you explain why my grandchildren believe their grandmother has been dead for 6 years? Can you explain why you've been secretly visiting me in London while allowing your wife to maintain a memorial garden in my honor? Can you explain why you delivered a eulogy at a funeral for someone who was sitting in her London flat, wondering why her family had stopped calling? He sank back into his chair. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he said quietly. Natasha she got carried away with the story. The story. When you moved to London, she was frustrated about the distance, about how complicated it made family logistics. She started by telling people you were too ill to travel. Then that your health was declining rapidly. Then that you had passed away peacefully in your sleep. And you allowed this. At first I thought it was temporary. Just a way to avoid difficult conversations about why you weren't at family events. I planned to correct it after a few months. But you didn't. By the time I realized how elaborate the lies had become, correcting them would have meant admitting that I'd allowed my children to grieve unnecessarily. It seemed kinder to let them believe you were at peace than to explain that their mother had fabricated your death. I stared at my son, this 42-year-old medical professional, who had chosen ongoing deception over temporary discomfort. Something cold settled in my chest. Christopher, your children have been placing flowers on a memorial stone in your backyard, believing they were honoring their grandmother's memory. They have spent 6 years thinking that I didn't love them enough to stay in their lives, when in reality, I was prevented from staying by their mother's elaborate fraud. I know, and I'm sorry, but there is no but. Christopher, your wife committed fraud by establishing memorial scholarship funds in my name. She accepted condolences and donations based on my fabricated death. And you enabled that fraud by choosing silence over truth, allowing a lie to metastasize into something more cruel with every passing year. What are you going to do? I rose from my chair and walked to the window of his office, looking out over the rolling Connecticut landscape where my grandchildren lived just 20 minutes away, completely unaware that the grandmother they had mourned was alive, watching from a distance and utterly heartbroken. I'm going to attend Sophia's birthday party tomorrow evening, I said quietly. I'm going to let 300 people see that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. And then I'm going to speak to my grandchildren about why they've spent 6 years mourning a grandmother who was alive, and missing them every single day. Mom, please don't do this at Sophia's party, Christopher pleaded. It will ruin her celebration. I turned back to face him. Christopher, your wife ruined Sophia's celebration 6 years ago, when she decided to turn my granddaughter's birthday into an opportunity to harvest sympathy for a fabricated loss. Tomorrow evening is simply when the truth catches up with the lies. Some conversations end relationships permanently. As I walked out of Christopher's office, I understood that my relationship with my son might be one of the casualties of what was coming. But my relationship with my grandchildren was worth that risk. Saturday evening arrived wrapped in the kind of crisp October air that makes Connecticut look like a postcard. I spent the afternoon at a boutique in Greenwich, selecting an elegant black dress and a sophisticated masquerade mask, one that would allow me to blend seamlessly into the party's theme while preserving anonymity until I chose otherwise. The sales associate, a young woman named Kelly, was particularly attentive as she helped me select accessories appropriate for the evening's formality. This mask is absolutely stunning, she said, holding up an intricately beaded piece that covered the upper half of my face while leaving my mouth and chin visible. Very mysterious. Very elegant. A real special occasion piece. You could say that, I replied. I'm attending a party where I expect to surprise some people who haven't seen me in quite a while. Her eyes lit up. How exciting. I love reunion parties. There's something magical about reconnecting with people from your past. If only she knew just how magical this particular reunion was going to be. I arrived at the Greenwich Country Club at precisely 7:30, timing my entrance to coincide with cocktail hour, when guests would be distracted by conversation and champagne rather than alert to newcomers. The valet took my rental car, and I walked through the club's elegant entrance with the confidence born of 40 years of legal practice and the moral authority of someone who had been grievously wronged. The party was everything James's investigation had suggested it would be. The ballroom was dressed in silver and black, adorned with towering floral arrangements and professional lighting that transformed the space into something closer to a high-end wedding reception than a birthday party. A jazz quartet provided refined background music while uniformed servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that likely exceeded most people's monthly grocery budgets. I accepted a glass of champagne and positioned myself near the bar. Close enough to observe, far enough to remain unnoticed. The guest list was impressive. Sophia's classmates and their affluent parents mingled alongside Connecticut's social elite. I recognized several faces from society pages, people who moved comfortably in circles where a federal judge's widow would typically be welcomed, not erased. At exactly 8 p.m., Christopher stepped up to the microphone to welcome the guests. He looked handsome and assured in his tuxedo, every inch the successful surgeon and devoted father he presented to the world. What the guests couldn't see was the faint tremor in his hands as he gripped the microphone, or the way his eyes kept darting toward the entrance, as if bracing for an unwelcome apparition. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate our beautiful daughter Sophia," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. 16 years ago, Natasha and I were blessed with this amazing young woman who has brought immeasurable joy to our lives. I watched my granddaughter standing near the head table, radiant in a silver gown that made her appear far older than 16. She had grown so much since I'd last seen her in person 3 years earlier, during what I now understood had been one of Christopher's secret visits to London. Her hair was longer. Her face had shed its childhood softness. She carried herself with the poised confidence of a young woman raised in privilege and expectation. Alexander stood beside her, tall for his 14 years, unmistakably Christopher's son. Both children smiled graciously as guests approached with congratulations and well wishes. But beneath the polish I saw it. A quiet ache. They were children who had learned how to be charming while carrying private grief. The kind of practiced composure that comes from loss endured too young. They were still mourning me. 6 years later, my grandchildren were still carrying sorrow for a grandmother they believed had loved them. And then vanished. Natasha took the microphone next, and my jaw tightened as I watched her address the crowd with the smooth confidence of someone long practiced in social manipulation. "Christopher and I are so grateful for all of you who have supported our family through the years," she said warmly. "Sophia and Alexander have been blessed with an incredible community of friends and extended family who have helped us celebrate life's joys and navigate life's challenges." Navigate life's challenges. The euphemism was nauseating in its precision. "As many of you know," she continued, "we faced some difficult times as a family, particularly when we lost Christopher's mother several years ago. Grandma Beatrice would have been so proud to see Sophia tonight. We know she's watching over us from heaven." A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. Faces softened with rehearsed sorrow for a tragedy that had never occurred. I watched Sophia's face. Just for a moment, a shadow passed across her expression, quickly masked by grace. Even now she missed me. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I stepped away from the bar and began walking toward the front of the ballroom. My heels struck the polished floor with deliberate cadence, each step sounding unnaturally loud as conversations faltered and heads turned. Natasha was still speaking, still basking in communal sympathy, as the truth walked steadily toward her. "In Grandma Beatrix's memory," Natasha continued, "we've established scholarship funds that have already helped 3 deserving students pursue legal education. It's a fitting tribute to a woman who dedicated her life to justice." "And excuse me," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the wireless microphone system, as I stepped into the illuminated space near the head table. Natasha stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto me through the crowd, her expression shifting from mild irritation to dawning alarm as she processed my familiar voice, my posture, my unmistakable presence. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I continued, lifting a hand toward my face and removing my masquerade mask with deliberate precision. "But I feel compelled to correct some misinformation about my memorial scholarship funds." The sound that escaped Natasha's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a scream as my face was revealed to the 300 guests, who, moments earlier, had been listening to speeches about my heavenly oversight of family celebrations. Sophia and Alexander stood frozen beside the head table. Their expressions cycled rapidly, confusion, disbelief, and then dawning recognition, as they processed the impossible sight of their supposedly deceased grandmother standing alive and well in the spotlight of their party. "Hello, darling," I said, directing my gaze to Sophia, my voice gentle but clearly audible throughout the suddenly silent ballroom. "I'm sorry I missed your last 6 birthday parties. I wasn't properly invited." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the jazz quartet lowering their instruments, as the musicians realized the evening's program had taken a sharp and unexpected turn. 300 guests stared at me in various stages of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. They were collectively grappling with the possibility that they were witnessing either a miraculous resurrection or the exposure of an elaborate deception. But I had eyes only for my grandchildren. They stared back at me with expressions of wonder, disbelief, and fragile hope that broke my heart and filled it at the same time. "Grandma B," Sophia whispered. Her voice was barely more than a breath, yet it carried clearly through the stillness of the ballroom. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly, Grandma B is very much alive. And she's been missing you terribly. Some revelations require dramatic staging to achieve maximum impact. This was very much one of those revelations. The silence stretched on, feeling like an eternity, though it was probably no more than 10 seconds. 300 people stood frozen in the Greenwich Country Club ballroom. Champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips, conversations abandoned mid-thought, as they tried to process the impossibility of what they were witnessing. Then Sophia broke the silence. The sound she made, a sob of pure anguish mixed with disbelief, will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was the sound of a child realizing that the grandmother she had mourned for 6 years was standing alive in front of her. "But you're dead," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly through the still active microphone system. "Mom said you died. We had a funeral. We have your memorial stone in the garden." "I know, darling," I said gently, stepping closer to the head table where my granddaughter stood in her beautiful silver gown, tears beginning to streak down her cheeks. "Your mother told me about the memorial stone. She also told me about the scholarship fund she established in my name." Alexander moved toward me cautiously, as though approaching an apparition that might vanish if he moved too quickly. At 14, he was nearly as tall as I was, but in that moment he looked like the confused little boy I remembered from my last proper visit. "Grandma B," he said, his voice cracking with adolescent uncertainty. "Is it really you?" "It's really me, sweetheart. I've been living in London, missing you both terribly, wondering why you stopped calling and writing." "We stopped calling because Mom said you were dead," Sophia said. Her voice strengthened as shock began to harden into something sharper. "We stopped writing because Mom said letters to heaven don't need stamps." A murmur rippled through the crowd as guests began to grasp the implications of what they were hearing. Phones appeared in hands, some recording video, others undoubtedly sending frantic messages about the unprecedented drama unfolding at what was meant to be an elegant Sweet 16 celebration. Natasha, who had remained frozen since the moment I removed my mask, finally found her voice. "This is impossible," she said, the words echoing through the microphone she still clutched. "Beatrice, you can't be here. You're supposed to be dead." "I'm supposed to be dead according to you," I interrupted, turning to face my daughter-in-law directly. "According to the story you've been telling for 6 years. The story that allowed you to exclude me from my grandchildren's lives while collecting sympathy and donations based on my fabricated demise." "Ladies and gentlemen," Christopher said suddenly, moving toward the microphone with the strained calm physicians use during medical emergencies, "there seems to be some family confusion that we should address privately." "No, Christopher," I said firmly, my voice carrying the authority that 40 years of legal practice had trained me to project. "This confusion has been private for 6 years. It's time for it to be public." I turned to the audience, noting that several members of Connecticut's social elite were hanging on every word, aware that this would undoubtedly become the most talked-about party scandal in Greenwich history. "My name is Beatrice Montgomery," I said. 6 years ago, my daughter-in-law announced to this community that I had passed away peacefully in London. She organized a memorial service, established scholarship funds in my name, and accepted your condolences and donations based on my supposed death. The murmuring intensified as guests connected the dots, remembering the funeral service, the checks they had written, the sympathy they had offered to a grieving family. "In reality," I continued, "I have been living in London for the past 10 years, serving on the International Court of Justice. I have been very much alive, paying taxes, attending judicial conferences, and sending Christmas cards to grandchildren who never received them because their mother intercepted my correspondence." "This is insane," Natasha exclaimed, her voice rising toward hysteria. "You moved to England and abandoned your family. We had to tell the children something to explain why you never visited anymore." "I never visited because every time I tried to arrange a trip, you created obstacles," I replied evenly. "Every time I invited the children to London, there were scheduling conflicts. Every time I called to speak with them, they were conveniently unavailable." Alexander stepped closer to me, his face flushed with what I immediately recognized as inherited Montgomery anger. "Mom," he said, turning to face Natasha, "you told us Grandma B died of heart problems. You said she'd been sick for months but didn't want us to worry. You said she passed away peacefully in her sleep." She did die to us, Natasha shot back defensively. She moved thousands of miles away and stopped being part of our daily lives. What was I supposed to tell you? That your grandmother chose her career over her family. You were supposed to tell us the truth, Sophia said. Her voice was steady now, fueled by teenage righteous indignation. You were supposed to let us decide for ourselves whether we wanted a relationship with our grandmother, who lived overseas. I watched my granddaughter transform before my eyes, from a stunned child into a young woman who was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been stolen from her. 6 years. 6 years of a relationship with her grandmother. 6 years of letters, phone calls, video chats, and visits that could have happened, if not for her mother's deliberate interference. Sophia Alexander, I said gently, I want you both to know that I never chose my career over my family. I accepted a position in London because it was an honor for an American judge, but I always intended to maintain close relationships with you. I've been sending you birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and letters for 6 years. I've been trying to visit, trying to call, trying to stay connected to your lives. Where are our gifts? Alexander asked, looking back and forth between Natasha and me. Where are our birthday cards? Natasha's face drained of color as the realization hit her. The elaborate deception she had maintained for 6 years was unraveling in front of 300 witnesses, many of whom had donated money to memorial scholarship funds based on her fabricated story. I can show you bank records for the scholarship funds, I continued, addressing the crowd. I can provide evidence that donations made in my memory were used for personal expenses rather than educational purposes. I can demonstrate that the death certificate used for legal matters was fraudulent. Margaret Whitfield, whom I recognized as the chairwoman of Greenwich's Junior League, stepped forward, her expression that of someone realizing she had been deeply betrayed by a trusted community member. Natasha, she said clearly, the Junior League donated $5,000 to the Beatrice Montgomery Memorial Scholarship Fund. Are you telling us that money was obtained under false pretenses? And the church memorial service, added Robert Hayes, rector of St. Andrew's Episcopal. We held a full funeral with over 200 attendees. Mrs. Montgomery's name is on our memorial wall. The mood of the room shifted. The crowd grew restless, voices rising as people began to grasp the scale of the manipulation. How their genuine sympathy and generosity had been exploited in an elaborate fraud. But I wasn't interested in public humiliation or community justice. I was interested in the two teenagers standing in front of me, staring with expressions that held love, confusion, anger, and hope all at once. Sophia Alexander, I said, refocusing entirely on my grandchildren while the adult drama churned around us. Would you like to come with me somewhere quiet, so we can talk privately about the last 6 years? Yes, they both said at the same time, their voices overlapping in a harmony that reminded me of when they were little, when they used to finish each other's sentences. Some family reunions happen gradually over months or years. This one was happening immediately, dramatically, and in front of 300 witnesses who would ensure that the truth about Natasha's deception spread quickly through Connecticut's social circles. But first, I needed to reclaim my relationship with the grandchildren who had been stolen from me through calculated lies. I led Sophia and Alexander through the Greenwich Country Club to a quiet sitting room off the main lobby, away from the chaos we'd left behind. Through the closed doors, we could still hear the increasingly agitated voices of guests processing what they'd just witnessed. Inside the elegantly furnished room, it was just the three of us, trying to navigate 6 years of stolen time. My grandchildren sat side by side on a burgundy leather sofa, still in their formal party attire. They looked like beautiful, confused angels who had just discovered that their understanding of reality had been fundamentally wrong. I took a chair across from them, close enough to reach out and touch them, but far enough away to give them space. I don't understand, Sophia said softly, her voice small and lost in a way that broke my heart. If you've been alive this whole time, why haven't we seen you? Why didn't you come to our school plays or our soccer games or our birthdays? Because your mother told me you were always busy when I tried to visit, I said gently, and that you'd lost interest in maintaining a relationship with a grandmother who lived so far away. But that's not true, Alexander said, his voice rising with indignation. We asked about you all the time when we were younger. We wanted to visit London. We wanted to video call with you. What did your mother tell you when you asked about me? I asked. She said you were too busy with your important job to spend time with kids, Sophia replied. She said international judges don't have time for family visits or phone calls. Anger tightened in my chest as I realized how completely Natasha had poisoned their understanding of my priorities and my love. Sophia Alexander, I said firmly, you need to understand something very clearly. There is nothing in this world more important to me than my relationship with you. Not my career. Not my position in London. Nothing. I've been trying to stay connected to you for 6 years. Then why did Mom tell us you were dead? Alexander asked, his 14-year-old bluntness cutting straight to the heart of it. Because your mother decided it was easier to exclude me permanently than to manage a long-distance relationship. But she made us put flowers on your grave, Sophia said, tears forming again. Every year. On the anniversary of when she said you died. We'd go to the memorial stone in our backyard and talk to you about our lives. The image nearly crushed me. My grandchildren standing in their backyard, placing flowers on a stone commemorating my fabricated death, sharing their hopes and dreams with someone they believed was gone forever. What did you tell me during those talks? I asked quietly. I told you about getting into AP classes and making varsity volleyball and getting my driver's license, Sophia said. I told you about the boy I had a crush on, my college plans, and how much I missed having a grandmother to talk to about girl stuff. And I told you about making honor roll and joining robotics and learning guitar, Alexander added. I told you I want to study engineering, and about Dad teaching me to golf, and how much I wished I had a grandfather since Grandpa Theodore died when I was little. I reached across the space between us and took both their hands, feeling the warmth and reality of them. I want you to know, I said softly, that even though I couldn't hear those conversations, I was thinking about you constantly. I wondered about your schools, your friends, your futures. I missed you every single day. Grandma B, Sophia said hesitantly, can I ask you something that might be hard? You can ask me anything, sweetheart. Are you angry with us for believing Mom when she said you were dead? Should we have known she was lying? Tears welled in my eyes. Sophia, you were 10 when your mother told you that. Alexander was 8. Children believe their parents because they have no reason not to. You had no way of knowing. But we're older now, Alexander said. Should we have figured it out? How could you? I asked gently. Your mother didn't tell a small lie. She created an entire reality. Funeral services, memorial funds, a headstone. Questioning it would have required believing your own mother capable of extraordinary cruelty. She is, Sophia said quietly, bitterness edging her voice. Outside the window, guests were leaving in clusters, animated and stunned. By morning, Natasha's deception would be the subject of every whispered conversation in Greenwich. But tonight wasn't about that. What happens now? Alexander asked. You're alive, Mom lied, and we lost 6 years. What do we do with that? We don't try to reclaim lost time, I said. We go forward. We build from where we are. Do you want a relationship with us? But threaded through the shock and grief was something else. The fragile, luminous possibility of however many years we still had ahead of us to build something real, honest, and unbreakable. I love you both, I whispered into their hair. I have loved you every day that I've been alive, and I will love you every day that I continue to be alive. We love you too, Grandma B, they whispered back. Some relationships can survive elaborate deceptions and emerge stronger, because the truth, when it finally comes, is more powerful than the lies that tried to destroy it. This was going to be one of those relationships. The drive back to my hotel in Stamford felt surreal, with Sophia and Alexander sitting beside me in the rental car while their mother's Sweet 16 celebration continued without them at the Greenwich Country Club. They had insisted on leaving the party immediately after our reunion, despite my suggestion that we stay and address the situation with Christopher and Natasha directly. I can't look at Mom right now, Sophia had said, her voice carrying the kind of finality that only comes from profound betrayal. I need time to process what she's done before I can have that conversation. And Dad knew, Alexander added, his voice heavy with a disappointment that seemed to age him beyond his 14 years. He's been visiting you in secret while letting us think you were gone. That's almost worse than Mom's lies. I suggested we go somewhere neutral, someplace quiet, free from public attention or family confrontation. The hotel's subdued lobby seemed like the safest option. Now we sat in comfortable chairs near the fireplace while other guests moved through their ordinary Saturday evening routines. Around us, life continued uninterrupted. For us, nothing would ever be the same. "Grandma B," Sophia said, curling gracefully into her chair, posture impeccable from years of careful training. "Can you tell us what your life has been like in London? I mean, what do you do every day? Where do you live? Do you have friends there?" "I live in a flat overlooking Hyde Park, near the American Embassy District," I said. "I serve on panels for the International Court of Justice, helping resolve legal disputes between countries. It's intellectually challenging work, but also quite solitary compared to the family court cases I handled in Connecticut." "Do you miss America?" Alexander asked. "I miss specific things," I said. "Autumn in New England. Easy access to proper Mexican food. But mostly I miss family. I miss being part of your daily lives. Knowing your favorite subjects in school. Getting phone calls when something exciting happens." "What's your flat like?" Sophia asked, her curiosity tinged with something deeper. An effort to build a mental picture of where I'd been living all this time while she believed I was dead. "It has 2 bedrooms, a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a small kitchen where I've learned to make decent tea and terrible scones. One bedroom is my office. The other has twin beds." "Twin beds?" Alexander repeated. "I always hoped that someday you might visit." They both stared at me. "You kept a room ready for us?" he asked. "I've kept it ready for 6 years," I said. "I hoped that eventually we'd work out the logistics for you to spend part of a summer vacation with me in London." "Even when we weren't calling or writing?" Sophia asked. "Especially when you weren't calling or writing." I explained that I'd assumed their silence meant they were busy with teenage lives, uninterested in maintaining a close relationship with a grandmother overseas. Still, I believed that as they grew older they might want to reconnect. "Mom told us you didn't want to hear from us," Alexander said quietly. "She said international calls were expensive, that you preferred email. And then she said you stopped responding to emails too." "I never received emails from either of you," I said. "And I never stopped wanting to hear from you." Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling with focused intensity. "I have emails here Mom said she sent you. Birthday messages, school achievements, vacation photos." She showed me replies that were supposedly from me. "May I see them?" I read through what appeared to be years of correspondence between my grandchildren and someone pretending to be me. The voice was close but not quite right. An impression carefully studied, yet fundamentally hollow. "These aren't from me," I said gently. "Your mother wrote them herself." "So not only did she tell us you were dead," Alexander said, his indignation rising, "but before that, she was impersonating you?" "It appears so." "This took planning," Sophia said. "Years of it." "Why would she do this?" I heard not anger but bewilderment, someone trying to understand motivations that felt fundamentally cruel. "I believe your mother saw my move to London as a way to simplify her life," I said. "International relationships require effort, time zones, travel, logistics. It was easier to eliminate the complication than to manage it." "But we're her children," Alexander said. "Shouldn't she have cared what we wanted?" "She made decisions based on what she believed was best for her family," I said, "without considering that you might have different ideas about what was best for you." A hotel staff member approached with the discreet professionalism reserved for emotional family situations. "Excuse me, Mrs. Montgomery. There's a gentleman at the front desk asking for you. He says he's your son, Christopher." Sophia and Alexander exchanged a glance. Neither looked ready. "Would you like me to speak with him alone first?" I asked. "Yes," they said together, the synchronized response a reminder of the children they used to be, united against adult authority. "I'll be right back," I promised. "Don't go anywhere." Christopher stood in the lobby wearing the same tuxedo from the party, its elegance undermined by the expression of a man watching his life unravel. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." "Yes," I replied, "we do. But first I need to know. Are you here to defend your wife's actions, or to acknowledge the damage your complicity caused your children?" "I'm here to apologize," he said, "and to figure out how to repair the harm done to our family. Our family, I repeated. Christopher, I haven't been part of your family for 6 years. Your wife convinced your children I was dead, and you allowed it. I know, he said, and I take full responsibility for my part. Your part, I said. Your part was enabling fraud, allowing your children to grieve unnecessarily, and lying to me about why my grandchildren never wanted to speak to me. You're right, he said. There's no excuse. I studied his face, searching for genuine remorse rather than strategic damage control. After 40 years of evaluating sincerity in courtrooms, I trusted my instincts when it came to distinguishing authentic accountability from performance. Christopher, what are you planning to do about Natasha's deception? I asked quietly. Are you going to continue your marriage to someone who committed fraud and deliberately alienated your children from their grandmother? Or are you going to prioritize your children's emotional well-being over your own convenience? Christopher rubbed his temples. I don't know yet. Tonight has been overwhelming. I need time to process everything that's happened. Your children don't have time for you to process, I replied evenly. They've just learned that their mother manipulated them for years, and that their father was complicit in that manipulation. They need immediate reassurance that at least one parent is willing to put their needs ahead of adult relationship drama. He exhaled sharply. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be the father your children deserve instead of the husband who enables his wife's cruelty toward his own mother. Some conversations force people to choose between loyalty and integrity. Christopher was about to discover which choice he was willing to make. His face cycled through shock, defensiveness, shame, and fear as he processed my ultimatum. Around us, the hotel lobby still buzzed faintly with the aftermath of Sophia's party. 300 influential witnesses to the collapse of a carefully maintained lie. Mom, you have to understand, he said finally, falling back on the rationalizations that had likely sustained him for 6 years. The situation was more complicated than it looks from the outside. Christopher, I said calmly, there is nothing complicated about a woman telling people that her mother-in-law is dead when she is very much alive in London. That is fraud. Plain and simple. But you moved away, he countered weakly. You chose your career over staying close to your grandchildren. I accepted a prestigious international appointment that honored American jurisprudence on a global scale. I replied, that is not the same as abandoning my family. And even if it were, the appropriate response would have been an honest conversation about maintaining long-distance relationships, not fabricating my death. Through the lobby windows, several luxury cars pulled into the circular drive. I recognized a few guests who had left Sophia's party early, no doubt to process what they had just witnessed. Christopher, I continued, your wife didn't just lie to your children. She defrauded your community. People donated thousands of dollars to memorial scholarship funds based on my supposed death. The church held a funeral service with over 200 attendees. Your neighbors have been offering condolences for 6 years. I know, he said quietly, and we'll figure out how to address the financial aspects. The financial aspects? I repeated. Christopher, your wife committed criminal fraud. She established memorial funds using a false death certificate. She accepted donations under false pretenses. This isn't a family misunderstanding that can be resolved with apologies and restitution. His silence told me everything. Are you planning to press charges? I asked. The question revealed his priorities immediately. His hesitation wasn't about the harm done to his children. It was about protecting Natasha from consequences. I'm planning to prioritize my grandchildren's welfare over protecting the woman who stole 6 years of their relationship with their grandmother, I said. He looked startled. What does that mean? It means Sophia and Alexander will need serious support to process the trauma of learning that their mother manipulated them, and that their father enabled it. They need stability, honesty, and adults who prioritize their emotional needs over convenience. Christopher glanced toward the seating area, where Sophia and Alexander sat together, visible through the open lobby layout. They looked older somehow, straighter, quieter, more watchful. They look so grown up, he murmured. I remember when they were small and everything felt simpler. Things felt simpler because you allowed Natasha to handle complex situations through deception, I replied. You chose the illusion of simplicity over the reality of authentic family relationships. He swallowed. So what happens now? What do you want from me? I want you to have an honest conversation with your children about your role in excluding me from their lives. I want you to acknowledge that you prioritized your wife's preferences over their right to know their grandmother. And I want you to commit, clearly and consistently, to making decisions based on their needs, not your comfort. And if I do all that, then we can begin rebuilding trust. But if you continue to protect Natasha's deception or minimize the damage, your children are old enough to decide which relationships they want to maintain. Christopher nodded slowly. We walked together toward Sophia and Alexander. Both were watching us closely. Dad, Sophia said before he could speak, we need to ask you some questions, and we need honest answers. Of course, sweetheart. Did you know Mom was telling people Grandma B was dead? His hesitation answered before his words did. Yes, he said. Did you know she was using Grandma B's fake death to raise money for scholarships? I knew about the scholarships, he admitted. I didn't realize the money was being used for personal expenses. Alexander leaned forward, his voice steady but intense. Then why didn't you tell us the truth? Why did you let us think our grandmother was dead when you knew she was alive? Christopher's shoulders slumped. Because correcting the lie would have meant admitting I let you grieve unnecessarily. I thought it was kinder to let you believe she was at peace. Kinder to who? Sophia asked sharply. He hesitated again. I thought it was kinder to you, but I see now I was really avoiding a difficult conversation. Alexander's voice cracked just slightly. We spent 6 years missing Grandma B. We talked to her at her memorial stone. We told her about our achievements and our problems. We grieved someone who was alive and missing us. I know, Christopher whispered. And I'm so sorry. Sophia stood and walked to the lobby windows, staring out at the Connecticut landscape she'd grown up in under a lie. Dad, she said without turning around, do you love Mom more than you love us? The question hung in the air. Sophia, he said carefully, I love you and Alexander more than anything. But you chose Mom's feelings over our right to know our grandmother. You're right, he said. And that was wrong. So what are you going to do now? Alexander asked. Christopher looked at his children, then at me, then back at them. I'm going to make things right, he said. Even if that means making decisions your mother doesn't like. Like what? Sophia asked. Like supporting your relationship with your grandmother no matter what. Like telling the truth. Like making sure you both get the help you need to process this. Sophia and Alexander exchanged a look. Okay, Sophia said. But we're holding you accountable. And if you don't, Alexander added calmly, we're old enough to decide which parent we want to live with. Christopher went pale. I understand, he said. I'll earn back your trust through actions, not promises. Some conversations end childhood. This was one of them. I was proud of my grandchildren. 3 days later, I sat in my London flat, staring at my phone as it rang non-stop. James Whitmore, my private investigator, had warned me the story would spread. But I hadn't anticipated this. Grandmother returns from the dead to expose daughter-in-law's 6-year fraud. Read the Greenwich Time headline. And Connecticut was just getting started. The article included photographs from the party, quotes from shocked guests, and a detailed timeline of Natasha's elaborate deception. One that made her actions seem even more calculated and cruel in print than they had felt in person. Seeing it laid out so clinically was almost worse than living through it. My phone buzzed with yet another call. This one was from Sophia, who had been checking on me several times a day since Saturday evening's revelation. Grandma B, are you okay? I saw the newspaper articles online. They're turning this into some kind of soap opera instead of what it really was. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said gently. The media attention is overwhelming, but it's temporary. What matters is that the truth is finally public, and now we can move forward. There was a brief pause before she spoke again, her voice more tentative. Actually, Alexander and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something important. What is it? Would it be okay if we came to visit you in London? Not just for a short trip, maybe for an extended stay. Possibly for the rest of the school year. The request surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Sophia and Alexander had spent the last 3 days processing the magnitude of their mother's manipulation, while also navigating the social fallout of being the children whose family fraud had become Connecticut's most scandalous news story. Sophia, I said carefully, I would love nothing more than to have you visit London. But that's a big decision. It would affect your education, your friendships, your daily routine. Have you discussed this with your father? Yes, she replied. We talked with Dad, and he thinks it might actually be good for us to have some distance while everything gets sorted out, legally and socially. And your mother? She's not speaking to us right now. She's staying at her sister's house while Dad talks to lawyers about the fraud charges and the divorce proceedings. Divorce proceedings. Christopher had apparently chosen to prioritize his children's well-being over preserving a marriage to someone who had committed fraud and alienated her family through years of elaborate deception. Sophia, I said, coming to London would mean changing schools, adjusting to a different education system, and living in a completely new culture. Are you prepared for that kind of disruption? We've spent the last 6 years living in a completely false reality created by our mother's lies, she replied quietly. Changing countries feels less disruptive than staying in a place where everyone knows our family was built on fraud. Her logic was sound, and the maturity in her voice told me this wasn't an impulsive, trauma-driven idea. The children had thought carefully about what they needed. What does Alexander think? I asked. He's actually more excited than I am. He says London has better engineering programs than his current school, and he wants to visit all the science museums and learn about British technology development. And you? I asked. What appeals to you about London? I want to get to know you properly, she said softly. I want to understand who you really are, instead of trying to reconcile the grandmother I remember from when I was little with the person Mom described, who supposedly cared more about work than family. Sophia, I said, my voice thick with emotion, having you and Alexander live with me would be the most wonderful thing that could happen to me. But I need to know you're choosing London for positive reasons, not just running away from something painful. We're not running away, she replied firmly. We're choosing to build relationships based on honesty instead of staying somewhere we've learned we can't trust the person who was supposed to protect us most. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Christopher. He sounded exhausted, but more decisive than I'd heard him in years. Mom, I need to talk to you about Sophia and Alexander's request to spend time with you in London. They mentioned it to you already, didn't they? They did, I said. What are your thoughts? I think it would be beneficial for all of us. The kids need distance from the social fallout here, and they need time to rebuild their relationship with you without interference from Natasha or the community drama. And legally? I asked. Would their extended stay create custody complications with the divorce proceedings? My attorney is working on arrangements that would give you temporary guardianship while they're with you, he explained. Natasha isn't in a position to object to custody modifications. She's facing fraud charges and has demonstrated poor judgment where the children's welfare is concerned. Christopher, I said carefully, if Sophia and Alexander come to live with me, even temporarily, I will prioritize their emotional healing and education over adult convenience or social appearances. I understand, he replied immediately, and I support that completely. Mom, I know I failed as a father by allowing Natasha to manipulate our family relationships for so many years. I want my children to experience what it's like to live in a household where their needs come first. What about your medical practice? I asked. Your life in Connecticut? I'm taking a sabbatical, he said, to deal with the legal situation and to focus on repairing my relationship with the kids. Some things are more important than professional obligations. That evening, I video called with both Sophia and Alexander to discuss practical arrangements for their potential move. Seeing their faces on the screen reminded me of all the calls we could have shared over the past 6 years, if not for their mother's interference. Grandma B., Alexander said, his 14-year-old enthusiasm radiating through the screen. Would I be able to visit the British Museum and the Science Museum? And maybe even sit in on university engineering lectures? Alexander, I laughed, you could visit every museum in London. And if you're serious about engineering, we could absolutely arrange educational visits to universities. And Grandma B., Sophia added, would I be able to finish my junior year at a British school and still be prepared for American college applications? The British educational system is excellent, I assured her. And many American universities actively recruit students with international academic experience. So, you really think we could do this? Alexander asked. We could really come live with you for a while? If it's what you genuinely want, I said. And if your father supports it, then yes. I think we could create something beautiful together. 2 weeks later, I stood in Heathrow Airport holding a sign with Sophia and Alexander Montgomery written in my careful handwriting. When they emerged from customs, rolling their suitcases, looking equally excited and nervous, I felt something settle in my chest that had been broken for 6 years. They weren't visiting their supposedly dead grandmother anymore. They were coming home. As I hugged them in the arrivals hall, surrounded by other families reuniting after their own separations, I realized that some losses can be recovered completely, if the people involved are willing to prioritize love over convenience. This was going to be one of those recoveries. Welcome to London, I whispered. Welcome to the beginning of our real relationship. 6 months after Sophia and Alexander arrived, I woke to the sound of my granddaughter practicing violin in the sitting room, while my grandson worked intently on a robotics project at the kitchen table. And for the first time in years, the house felt exactly as it should. The flat that had once been designed for solitary living had transformed into a bustling household, where teenage energy mixed with international academics and cross-cultural discovery. Grandma B, Alexander called from the kitchen. The engineering department at Imperial College responded to my inquiry about their youth robotics program. They want to interview me for early admission consideration. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I replied. What would early admission mean for your timeline? It would mean I could start university-level courses part-time while finishing my secondary education. Kind of like advanced placement but with actual university credit. I walked into the kitchen, where Alexander had spread his robotics components across my dining table, creating what appeared to be a sophisticated mechanical device that bore no resemblance to anything I could identify. What exactly are you building? It's a prototype for automated medication dispensing for elderly patients. I got the idea when I realized how many older people in London live alone and might need help managing complex prescription schedules. The project was typical of how both children had approached their London experience, not just as an educational adventure, but as an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to their new community. Sophia had joined a youth volunteer program at the local hospital. Alexander had become involved with the neighborhood community center's technology training for seniors. Both had embraced British culture, while maintaining their American identities. Alexander, I asked, have you discussed this project with your father during your weekly calls? Yeah, Dad thinks it's amazing. He says he wishes he'd had opportunities like this when he was my age instead of just following the expected path from private school to an Ivy League university to medical practice. Christopher had been remarkably supportive of his children's London experience, visiting monthly and adjusting his own life to accommodate their new educational and social priorities. The divorce proceedings with Natasha had been finalized 2 months earlier, with Christopher receiving full custody based on Natasha's fraud conviction and demonstrated unfitness as a parent. Speaking of your father, I said, he mentioned during his last visit that he's considering relocating to London himself. How would you feel about that possibility? I think it would be great, Alexander replied without hesitation. Dad's been different since everything happened with Mom. More honest, more focused on what we actually need instead of what looks good socially. Sophia joined us in the kitchen, her violin case in hand, her hair pulled back in the kind of practical ponytail that suggested she'd been seriously focused on her practice session. Are we talking about Dad moving to London? Alexander was just saying he thinks it would be positive. I agree, Sophia said. Dad needs a fresh start somewhere that isn't connected to Mom's social network and all the community drama about the fraud situation. The fraud situation, as Sophia diplomatically referred to it, had resulted in Natasha serving 8 months in county jail, paying substantial restitution to the memorial scholarship donors, and being permanently banned from several charitable organizations where she had previously held leadership positions. The social consequences had been as devastating as the legal ones, with Natasha essentially exiled from the Connecticut social circles that had defined her identity. Girls, I need to ask you both something important, I said, settling into the kitchen chair across from Alexander's robotics project. Your father and I have been discussing arrangements for the upcoming school year, and we want to make sure you have input into decisions that affect your future. What kind of arrangements? Sophia asked. If your father relocates to London, you could continue your education here permanently rather than returning to Connecticut. That would mean applying to British universities instead of American ones, developing careers in international rather than domestic contexts, and essentially committing to building your adult lives in Europe rather than the United States. And if Dad doesn't relocate? Alexander asked. Then you would need to decide whether to return to Connecticut for your final years of secondary education or continue in London while maintaining long-distance family relationships. Both children were quiet as they processed the implications. At 16 and 14, they were old enough to understand that educational and geographic decisions made now would shape their opportunities for decades to come. Grandma B, Sophia said carefully, what do you want us to do? What would make you happiest? What would make me happiest is for both of you to make decisions based on your own interests and ambitions, rather than feeling obligated to prioritize my preferences or your father's convenience. But we want to know your honest opinion. My honest opinion is that you've both thrived in London in ways that suggest this environment suits your personalities and academic interests better than your previous school in Connecticut. But that doesn't mean London is objectively better for you. It just means it's been better for you during this particular period of your development. Alexander looked up from his robotics components with the expression he wore when trying to solve complex engineering problems. Grandma B, can I ask you something about your career decisions? Of course. When you moved to London for the international court position, did you know it would cost you 6 years of relationship with us? Or did you think the family connections would be maintained regardless of distance? The question was more sophisticated than I'd expected from a 14-year-old. But then again, both children had been forced to develop advanced thinking about family relationships and adult decision-making through their experience with Natasha's deception. I believed that family connections would be maintained regardless of distance, because I assumed that everyone involved would prioritize those relationships over convenience or social appearances. But you were wrong about that assumption, Sophia said quietly. I was wrong about your mother's willingness to maintain connections she found inconvenient. I was right about your father's love for you, and about your capacity to rebuild relationships based on honesty rather than proximity. So distance doesn't automatically damage family relationships, Sophia observed. No, I agreed. But it does require everyone involved to make active efforts to maintain connection. Then I think we should stay in London, Alexander said decisively. Not because we're running away from problems in Connecticut, but because we've discovered opportunities here that we want to pursue. And I think Dad should move here too, Sophia added. Not because he needs to follow us around, but because he deserves a chance to build a life based on what he actually wants rather than what's expected of him socially. That evening, we video called Christopher to discuss the children's preferences and his own decision-making process. He was sitting in his Connecticut office, but behind him I could see packing boxes that suggested he had already begun making arrangements. Dad, Sophia said without preamble, we want to stay in London permanently, and we want you to move here too. Not because we need you to take care of us, Alexander added, but because we think you'd be happier building a new life somewhere that isn't connected to all the drama with Mom. And London has great opportunities for international medical practice. You could do consulting work for the European medical system instead of just cosmetic surgery for Connecticut socialites. Christopher laughed, the first genuine amusement I'd heard from him since Sophia's disastrous birthday party. You two have given this serious thought, haven't you? We've had 6 months to think about what we want our family to look like when it's based on honesty instead of lies, Sophia replied. And we've decided we want it to look like people who choose each other because they enjoy each other's company, Alexander added. Not because they're stuck together through legal obligations or social expectations. In that case, Christopher said, smiling at the screen, I'm happy to inform you that I've already submitted my application for a medical license in the United Kingdom. Some family formations happen through birth and legal arrangement. Ours was forming through choice, honesty, and mutual respect across international boundaries, and it was stronger than anything we'd ever built through obligation or proximity. 2 years later, I stood in the gardens of Hampton Court Palace, Watching Sophia receive her international baccalaureate diploma with distinction while Alexander cheered from the audience, having just completed his first year of early admission engineering studies at Imperial College. Christopher sat beside me, looking proudly relaxed in a way that had taken months to achieve after relocating his medical practice to London's Harley Street. "Mom," he said quietly as we watched Sophia cross the graduation platform, "I need to thank you for something I've never properly acknowledged." "What's that?" "For fighting for my relationship with my children, even when I made it nearly impossible. For not giving up on our family when it would have been easier to write us off as lost causes." "Christopher, I never considered you lost causes. I considered you victims of manipulation who deserved the chance to build authentic relationships once the manipulation was exposed. But you could have pressed criminal charges against Natasha, sued for damages, made our lives much more complicated legally and financially. Because relationships were what mattered most. Money and legal vindication couldn't give me back 6 years with my grandchildren. But creating honest family connections could give us decades of future together." After the ceremony, we gathered for a celebratory lunch at a restaurant in Richmond, where Sophia and Alexander updated us on their educational and career plans. "I've been accepted to Oxford for international law," Sophia announced. "With a focus on human rights advocacy. The admissions committee was particularly interested in my essay about family fraud and the legal protections available to children who are manipulated by parents." "You wrote your university application essay about our family situation?" Christopher asked, surprised. "I wrote about how discovering I've been systematically lied to by my mother taught me that legal systems need better protections for children whose family relationships are damaged by parental deception." "And the admissions committee responded positively?" "They said it demonstrated sophisticated thinking about the intersection of family law and children's rights, along with personal experience that would inform my academic perspective." Alexander, who had been quietly working his way through what appeared to be his third serving of dessert, looked up with a grin that suggested he also had news. "And I've been invited to present my medication dispensing prototype at the European Youth Engineering Conference in Geneva next month." "Alexander, that's extraordinary," I said. "What will your presentation focus on?" "On how technology can help elderly people maintain independence while managing complex health needs." The project started as a way to help people in our London neighborhood, but apparently it has applications for aging populations throughout Europe. "Have you heard from your mother recently?" I asked carefully. "She sends emails occasionally,"